Hi, and welcome to my exploratory project on ancient Rome and ancient China by me, Annette Mayo. So, what makes a great society? Let's talk about freedom. Some things like freedom is to have freedom of speech or freedom to have education or free education and free to do as you please, of course, without disobeying laws or disrespecting others. Also, peace. A society needs a sense of peace to be able to tolerate one another by respecting one another and treating each other as equals in order to have a good standard of living. With stability, it's an important factor to a great society, like having a stable home, stable income, stable resources for living, for purposes like power, material goods, food, and water. Also, culture, our culture is what shapes the society. In a society, we must have culture to come together, like art, entertainment, and other forms of expression. Culture enhances our quality of life and increases overall well being for individuals and communities. Food, food always brings people together. So, and it always makes a society because people need food for survival. Foods such as fruits, vegetables, water that calls for healthy living is also important for a great society. Now that I talked about what makes a great society, I'm going to talk about criteria for a great civilization. So, when we talk about climate, the climate, which includes access to rivers for water, the weather is also important when thinking of climate for the purposes of plantation, farming, and agriculture. Like for example, in southern China, in the Yangtze River, it had like warmer and wetter and lusher climate, and which was well suited for rice cultivation. And the climate in the northern China was colder than the southern China, which allowed for the soil to be rich in nutrients, which also allowed for the production of a lot of wheat. In social structure gives civilization a framework for one's roles in society. For example, rulers, emperors, upper class priests, warriors, and government officials typically dominate society. Then we have large groups which fall under these categories, like farmers, artisans, and craftspeople who grow foods and make material goods that are necessary for society. With communication, means of communication such as spoken language or written languages are important as it is used to record historical events as well as used for creative expression and produce literature. Art also makes for a great civilization. Like painting helps depict stories of nature and depicts gods and rulers of the past. Architecture is also great for civilization because it was used to build things such as temples for worships or sacrifice, as well as palaces and tombs for kings. There are many architects that are still standing today, which play an important role in our history. Religion is important being that it unites people and explains the forces of nature as well as their roles in the world. Worshipping provides value and morals for the living. In early civilization, religions were connected to the rulers who claimed that their power was based on divine approval or themselves they were divine themselves. Trading goods and foods help to enrich a civilization. It does this by spreading inventions and cultures to different people and different cultures. Trades through trade routes also assist in the spread of many other things like services, textile making, religions, and diseases. Trade plays an important role as it is necessary to a continuous civilization. Now that you know what criteria for a great civilization is, we're going to talk about some similarities between Rome and China. Both empires were large, complex states which were governed by monarchs, bureaucracies, and standing armies. They both lasted for centuries and reached people through taxation and conscription policies. Both Rome and China invested in infrastructure such as roads, bridges, aqueducts, canals, and walls, like the Great Wall of China, for example, which protected them from invasions. Both faced similar challenges of hard work to keep the land from overload in the hands of hard to tax wealthy magnates. Both had relations with barbarians and faced nomadic groups ultimately dismembered the Romans absorbed by the Chinese. Both Christianity and Buddhism was spread by missionaries and merchants and spread by powerful emperors, and they both appealed to the lower class. The role of the emperors were both divine attributes in the sense that Rome chose the best generals and China could control imperial families and courts. Neither believed a single family can rule forever. In both empires, the neighboring areas that came under political domination were attracted to the conqueror's material goods, productive techniques, and other cultural products, resulting in gradual cultural assimilation. Now that I covered some similarities, let's talk about some differences between Rome and China. Geopolitically, Rome was small heartland which was central to Italy, whereas China was bigger and more cohesive geographically and culturally. There was also a difference in longevity and persistence. Although they both lasted for centuries, China's empire lasted for over 3,000 years, whereas Rome rose to power but eventually fell, lasting about 1,200 years. There was definitely a big difference in spoken and written language. Rome used mostly Latin and Greek language while implementing several others. For instance, Latin used alphabetic language depicting sounds in Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, and Romanian. The Roman Empire was linguistically and culturally more diverse than China, and China, there was only one written language, whereas people in Rome still wrote Greek and several other languages, as I stated earlier. With religion, the spread of Christianity was spread throughout the entire Roman Empire, whereas Buddhism was spread throughout East and South Asia. Politically, the dynastic principle was stronger in China than in Rome, and there was no institution comparable to the Roman Senate. With ideology, China was Confucius, Daoism and legalism, while Rome sort of absorbed religions of the land they conquered until the rise of Christianity. The social and economic structures also differed in the two empires. At, at times, the Roman Empire was socially in conflicts of disagreements and was not as stable, whereas Chinese Empire was socially harmonious, no class conflicts that were impossible to deal with, and was more stable. Slavery was much more important in Rome than in China, and merchants were more favored. Now I'm going to talk about ways that the 21st century ideas differ from ancient Rome. Architecture from the Colosseum building has impacted the 21st century to come up with ideas such as sports stadiums. Sports stadiums are derived from the similar design of the Colosseum in Rome, taking about the same oval shape with tier seating. However, today's style and texture and the use of the stadium differs from how ancient Rome did. Also, scientists are studying the cement structure material that held the Colosseum, which was made of volcanic ash. And the reason for this study is because of the durability. And so with this study, they hope to find a similar match to use so that the buildings can last the way the Colosseum did. In technology and science, the ancient Romans developed tools and methods for use in agriculture. Throughout their time, they have developed or refined ways to effectively plant crops, irrigate, and drain fields. Some techniques include crop rotation, pruning, grafting, seed selection, and manuring. Today, the same techniques are used, but with different inventions, like with mills that are used to process grains. Literature and language of Rome has a great influence on the 21st century. Let's take Shakespeare for a perfect example, as he was fascinated by literature, which inspired him to incorporate Julius Caesar, Antony, and Cleopatra into his plays. Roman language also had a major impact on the 21st century, being that Latin language was spread throughout the world and implemented into languages like French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, and Catalan. The Roman law and court system has impacted and served as a foundation for many systems like the US and Europe, for example. However, they still use the same court system where they do preliminary hearings to make a decision prior to trying a case. And if they are approved, a prominent Roman would try the case along with witnesses and evidence as such. Finally, I'm going to talk about ways that the 21st century ideas differ from ancient China. When it comes to trade, there was a time in ancient China when they were forced to trade against their will. Today, however, that has changed and that is not the case anymore. In fact, they have the ability to make the choice of closing out their own markets to other countries. Trouble with neighboring countries. In ancient China, they had their troubles with neighboring countries as to why they built walls to keep out invaders, such walls like the Great Wall of China, for example. However, in today, China still struggles with neighboring countries and uninvited guests on its borders. Geographically, according to a map of the 21st century, it reveals how China's definition has differed as well over time. Language and government. Today's Chinese culture is associated with those ideas of ancient China, still incorporating things such as language, history, and ethical systems like Confucianism. Freedom of religion. At some point in the 1900s, some Chinese people adopted the Christian beliefs, but was seen as traitors to the Chinese. So much so that they even called death onto Christian missionaries and Chinese Christians. Today, China has changed the direction between religion, but with the fear that it can turn their state upside down. And here are my references. Thank you for listening.